Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I'm going to cover how to create a dependent drop-down list in Google Sheets without using app scripts. So what do I mean by dependent drop-down list? Here I have a table with category and subcategory. I'm going to take you back to the setup tab where I created the categories and the subcategories for this example. The main categories are income, expense, and savings. And under each of these main categories, we have subcategories. So salary, freelance, rent, groceries, down payment, emergency. These are examples of subcategories that will fall under these main categories. Now, in my sheet, if I select income, the only options that show up here would be the subcategories for income. If I change this to expense, now the subcategories that show up here are the subcategories for expense. And finally, for savings, only the subcategories for savings show up here. That's what we're going to cover today. We just went over the one for income, expense, savings. Here's another example: HR, finance, and marketing. And here are some of the subcategories that go under that. This will probably work for someone that is creating an inventory planner or organizer. So you have the different categories here and the subcategories that go underneath. Now, these examples, I only use 3 categories, but you can expand it to 4 or 5 or 6. It really doesn't matter. So we're going to get started with the tutorial, and I will use this as an example to show you how to get it done. Go ahead and organize your information in a table. You're going to need to organize it in this structure where your main categories are here and then your subcategories are underneath that. Like I said before, you can use more than 3, and I will expand this to include one more so I can show you how it works. So for this main category, I'll include debt as the 4th category, and let's add some subcategories. So let's say student loans, credit card, private loan. Let's add one more. So now we have our 4 main categories. The next thing we need to do is to create named ranges. A named range in Google Sheets is when you assign a name to a cell or a group of cells. For example, if I select this entire table, all right, I can assign a name to this table. If I select these cells, I can assign a name to these cells. So let's say I want to assign a named range to this table. To do this, select the range, go to data, and click on name ranges. Now you can assign a name to that space, so we can call it finance. Here's the range we're going to apply the name to, and click done. All right. If you look here, you see I already did this for some other ranges. I will delete this finance named range. We don't need a named range for the entire table for this feature to work. We only need to create it for the subcategories underneath the main category. So I'll go ahead and delete this. So as you can see here, I have 3 named ranges. I have one for income, one for expense, and one for savings. So this one doesn't have one assigned to it because I just created it. So I'm going to do one right now. Select the entire range, including the ones that I don't have anything listed here, because the assumption is that you might have more debts or entries that you need to add to your table. So we're selecting the entire range and click on add range, and we'll call this debt. Okay, and click done. All right, so now we have our 4 named ranges done. Another easy way to add a named range would be to select the entire area and just type over the cells right here and hit enter, and it would automatically save it. So that's a quick, easy way to do it without having to go to data, name ranges, and then doing it that way. All right, so now that we have our 4 named ranges done for our 4 categories, the next thing we're going to do is create the tables with the drop downs. So I will create a new tab for that. All right, and we're going to create tables here. We're going to call this main category and call this subcategory. All right, so I removed all the excess columns and I resized it just so it's easier to focus in one area. So this is going to be our table where we create our drop-down lists. I'll just add a border around it. We have our header area and our table down here. The first thing we need to do is to add our drop-down here. To do this, select the entire area, go to insert and drop down. Now you can also do this by going to data validation, add rule, and the first rule that comes up is drop down, but we're not going to use that one. We're going to use drop down from range, and then click on this icon that says select data range. Go back to our setup tab. So we are going to be using this main category. So these are our main categories. So this is what we're going to use to create our first drop down. All right, so select this entire range, click OK. Back to our example, and here you can change the style of the drop down. Just choose the one that you prefer for what you are creating. I'll change this to arrow and click done. Now we're able to select the main category: income, expense, debt, savings, etc. Now we can actually create drop downs here by going to insert drop down for the subcategory, doing the same thing. Select this entire range with all the subcategories, okay, and hit done. And then when we go back here, the subcategories appear, but the problem is all of them appear. All the subcategories for all the main categories show up here, and that's not what we're trying to achieve. What we want is when we click on income, only 4 subcategories for income show up. If we change this to expense, now this is no longer available to select, so we delete it, and only the expense subcategories show up. All right, so we're going to remove this drop down because it's not going to work. In order to do this, we need to create helper rows. I'm going to create the helper rows here in this tab. So I'm going to add back some of the columns that I deleted. So now I have a good amount of them added back. And then I'm just going to resize these ones right here in the middle. So now these are going to be our helper columns. So if we go back to the example, you can see that when I open this up, here are the subcategory drop downs. So they're hidden from the main table, or another way to do it would be to create them in another sheet and then connect that sheet to the table. But it's easier to show you all in one place, and that's what I'm going to do. All right, so here's the formula we're going to need to use. And what this formula is going to do is it's going to reference this main category, filter the subcategories underneath this main category, and display them here. Okay, so that's all it's doing. It's going to look at the category here. So in this case, it's expense. And then it's going to match it up with a named range that we assigned to that category, and then filter the subcategories here. So if I change this from expense to income, you see, it changes to the subcategories for income. If I change this to debt, it changes it to the subcategories for debt. All right, so that's how this works. So we're just going to copy the formula. And of course, you can pause the video. Okay, I'm going to make it bigger, and I will also include the formula on the screen so you can easily see it. But here is the formula. I'm just going to copy this. All right, and then go back to our template here, and we're going to paste it here, right here. All right, so I added some borders and colors around it just to keep it organized, but place the formula here, and it works because we're using the same location that I use in the example. So when you're making yours, just try to do it exactly how I'm doing it. Use the same rows, use the same columns, okay? And then later on, when you make changes, the formula will adapt. So let's say right now I've placed the formula here, and I decide I want to add a column here. Now this is column C. If I click on the formula, you see it already adapts to column C. So it doesn't matter if you have to make changes later on. Just use the ones I'm using, and then later on, change your layout, change your template, and the formulas would adapt automatically. So now that this formula is working the way it's supposed to, we're going to just drag it down. And I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. So you can see that when income is selected, it shows the income subcategories. Let's change this to income, and this changes to the income subcategories. If I change this to debt, it shows the debt subcategories, and it is working for all of them. So every time I enter a new category, the subcategories for that main category shows up here. Now remember, if you're going to be using this in a different sheet, as long as the first option here, the first formula, is referencing the first main category, and the second one is representing the second one, it should work out perfectly fine. Okay, now that we have our subcategory table created, now we can create our subcategory drop downs. To do this, select the entire range. Click on Insert, Drop Down. Change this from drop down to drop down from range. Click on the icon to allow you to select the range. Now we're going to select the first row only. So E3 all the way down to Q3. All right, so E3 to Q3, just that range. Click OK. Click Done. All right, so now when we go back here, let's just change this to income. You can see it changes here, and the drop down changes to the one for income. Change it to savings. Subcategory changes to savings. So when you select that, you can select the one for savings. So this first row works fine. If we test the second row, you're going to see that it's not going to work. So here's income. Here it should show the drop down for income, but it's not. It's showing the drop down for savings. For this one, it should show the drop down for debt, but when we click no, it's showing the one for savings. We need to make an additional change so that this drop down only applies to this row, and this one to this row, this one to this row, etc. All right, to do this, we're going to go back to our drop down subcategories. So go back to edit. When this opens up, you can see that the drop down range that shows up is E3 to Q3. It has $ signs automatically added. So we're going to remove it. One before the column, after the column. Removing the dollar signs removes the absolute reference, so it only references individual rows. Now that's done. Click on done. Now let's test it out. So the first one, of course, we know works. So let's test the next one. So this one is income. So now it shows the income categories, debts, it shows the debts categories, savings, it shows the savings subcategories. So they're all working independently. If I go back to my setup tab and let's add income 2. So I added spouse income, and for debt, let's add our home loan. All right, so we added an additional subcategory for income and another one for debt. So if I select income, now I have the 5 drop downs with the additional one showing up here. And let's check the one for debt. I have the home loan that I added showing up here. So you can see how it works flawlessly without a problem. And if you have a longer list, you can make these rows longer by adding additional rows. It doesn't matter. All you need to do is to make sure that you drag the formula down. So let's say I add additional rows here. All right, so these rows don't have any formula. All I need to do is go to the last row with a formula and just drag it down. All right, so these new rows now have formulas, and if I select income, I should be able to select the drop down, expense, select the drop down for the new entries. Okay, and then finally, you can hide this entire area because you really don't need it anymore. So go ahead and select the entire area all the way down, view, group, and you can group it like that. Or if you don't want to use the group option, you can select the entire area and then hide columns E to R, and then it's out of the way. The reason why I don't like to do this is if you open it up by mistake, then you have to hide it again. All right. So now we have our table. We can delete everything here and it should still work without a problem. Here's our subcategory, savings. Here's our subcategory. All right, so I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.